I didn't plan to say anything that day. That's the truth. Most people don't believe when I tell this story. I walked into the conference room expecting another pointless Monday meeting. Coffee gone cold. Laptop half charged. Everyone pretending to listen while waiting for the clock to move. I had no idea my name was about to become entertainment. I had no idea a number with 6 digits was about to be read out loud like it was a joke. And I definitely didn't know HR was already listening when I finally spoke. This happened at a company that loved to call itself a family. You know the type. Open floor plan. Motivational posters about integrity. Slack channels full of fake praise. They bragged about transparency while rewarding silence. I'd been there almost 7 years. Long enough to stop believing the slogans. Long enough to know how things really worked. I was a senior analyst in operations. Not flashy. Not sales. Not marketing. I didn't bring in clients with handshakes and smiles. I built systems that kept money from bleeding out of the company. Forecasts. Risk modeling. Cost controls. The kind of work that never gets applause but quietly saves millions. I was good at it. Everyone knew that. They just didn't say it out loud. My manager's name was Derek. Late 30s. Loud confidence. The kind of man who learned enough corporate language to sound impressive without understanding much beneath it. He talked over people. Repeated your ideas 5 minutes later like they were his. Took credit so smoothly you almost questioned your own memory. We had history. Not dramatic history. The slow, grinding kind. I'd correct him in meetings. He'd smile and say, "Good catch," and then exclude me from the next call. I'd deliver results. He'd frame them as team efforts when reporting upward. Promotions passed me by with vague explanations about timing. Still I stayed, because the pay was good, because I'd built leverage, because I was patient. What no one at that table knew was that 3 weeks earlier, I had signed a confidential separation agreement. Not because I was leaving on bad terms, because I was leaving on very specific ones. The company had quietly violated compensation policies for years, deferred bonuses misclassified, equity adjustments mishandled, performance-based payouts selectively delayed. I didn't go looking for it. I tripped over it while auditing a cost center variance. Once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. I documented everything. Dates, emails, policy language, internal contradictions. I didn't threaten. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. Calm ones. Legal ones. 2 weeks later, I was in a glass office with HR and outside counsel. Not angry. Not scared. Just prepared. They wanted silence. I wanted fairness. We settled. $121,000. Gross payout. Confidential. Direct deposit scheduled for the following Friday. The agreement was clear. No disclosure. No retaliation. No commentary. Derek was not supposed to know, which is why it was interesting that he smiled at me when I walked into that conference room. Not a normal smile. Not his usual performative grin. It lingered, like he knew something. He waited until everyone sat down, until laptops were open, until the door clicked shut. Then he stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "All right, team, before we get into Q3 targets, I want to address something unusual." The room quieted. People love unusual when it's not about them. He turned toward me. "Some people," he said, dragging the word out, "think they can play games with the system." A couple of nervous laughs. "I mean, imagine thinking you deserve a 6-figure payout just for doing your job." My name hadn't been said yet, but every head turned toward me anyway. He held up a printed document. White paper. Black text. My last name bolded at the top. "I mean," he continued, smiling wider now, $121,000. He read the number slowly, carefully, like he was savoring it, out loud, in front of everyone. There it was. My confidential settlement amount. My agreement. My signature. Something that should have never left a locked folder. The room froze. No one laughed this time. Derek chuckled. Must be nice, right? Getting rewarded for causing problems. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. I let him finish. Because when people think they're untouchable, they reveal everything. He went on. This is what happens when you threaten legal action instead of trusting leadership. You cost the company money. You cost your team credibility. He looked around the table, performing for his audience. This is not the culture we're building. That's when I noticed something he didn't. The small black speaker on the center of the table. The red light blinking steadily. We weren't just on an internal meeting. HR was dialed in. They always were for sensitive discussions. Derek either forgot or didn't care. I finally spoke, calmly. Derek, I said, can you explain how you obtained a confidential settlement agreement that explicitly states its terms are restricted to HR, legal counsel, and me? The room went silent in a way that felt heavy. Not dramatic, just uncomfortable. He laughed again, but this time it sounded thinner. Oh, come on, he said. Don't act like a victim. We all know how this works. I leaned back slightly, still calm. No, I said. I'm genuinely asking. Because the agreement also states that disclosure constitutes a breach with personal liability. The red light on the speaker blinked again. Someone cleared their throat. I didn't look to see who. Derek's smile faltered for half a second. Then he recovered. You're threatening me now, he said. Louder. Defensive. I'm clarifying facts, I replied, since you chose to make them public. That's when a voice came through the speaker. Derek, HR said, we're on the line. Not angry, not loud, just present. You could feel the shift. The air changed. People straightened in their chairs. Someone closed their laptop. Another person stared very hard at the table. Derek blinked. Yes, I know, he said quickly. I looped you in for transparency. There it was. The lie. Sloppy. Obvious. HR didn't respond right away. I continued. For clarity, I said, I did not threaten the company. Identified documented compensation violations. Legal counsel reviewed them. A settlement was reached. The amount you just read out loud was determined by the company, not demanded by me. I paused. And this meeting, I added, appears to violate at least 3 sections of the agreement you signed on behalf of management. Derek's face changed. Not anger. Something closer to calculation. He was trying to find an exit. This is inappropriate, he snapped. We can discuss this privately. HR spoke again. No, they said. We can't. Silence. We asked that all communication regarding this matter remain confidential. HR continued. This disclosure is concerning. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't need to, because everyone in that room was watching a man realize, in real time, that he had misjudged the situation. Derek tried to regain control. Let's not overreact, he said. It was just a number. HR didn't agree. We'll need to pause this meeting, they said. Derek, please remain. Everyone else is dismissed. Chairs scraped back. People avoided eye contact as they filed out. No one said a word to me. Not yet. I gathered my things slowly. No rush. No drama. As I stood up, Derek finally looked directly at me. This isn't over, he said quietly. I met his gaze. You're right, I said. It's not. And I walked out. By the time I reached my desk, my inbox was already filling up. But that was just the beginning. Because the number he thought would embarrass me, it was about to cost him everything that I didn't read the emails right away. That sounds dramatic, but it wasn't. It was practical. I knew whatever was waiting in my inbox would still be there in an hour. Panic ages badly in writing. I preferred to let people finish spiraling before I started paying attention. I walked to the restroom instead, locked myself into a stall, sat down fully clothed, not because I needed to cry, not because I felt shaken. I just needed 5 minutes where no one could ask me anything. The meeting had ended less than 10 minutes earlier, but the office already felt different. Like everyone was suddenly aware of invisible cameras, people whispering, Slack notifications popping up and stopping abruptly. That kind of tension doesn't come from gossip. It comes from fear. Derek had crossed a line no one pretends not to see. When I finally checked my phone, there were 12 new emails. 3 from coworkers. Polite, careful, variations of "Are you okay?" And that was intense. 1 from a manager in another department who had never spoken to me directly before, asking if I had time later to connect. 2 calendar invites had been quietly canceled. And then there was the one from HR. Subject line, immediate follow-up. No exclamation point. No emojis. That's how you know it matters. They asked me to come to a conference room on the 4th floor at 2 p.m. Legal would be present. I smiled to myself just slightly, because here's what Derek didn't understand. I wasn't improvising. I wasn't emotional. And I definitely wasn't surprised. The moment he read that number out loud, he confirmed everything I already suspected about how deeply he misunderstood the situation. He thought the payout was leverage. He thought embarrassment was power. He thought control came from volume. He didn't realize the agreement he mocked was designed for moments exactly like this. By the time 2 p.m. came, the office was buzzing. Not loudly, quietly, the way it does when something has gone wrong at a level people aren't allowed to talk about. I walked into the conference room and saw 3 people already seated. Megan from HR, mid-40s. Calm face. Tired eyes. She'd been with the company longer than Derek, which mattered more than her title. Next to her was an unfamiliar man in a gray suit. Outside counsel. Neutral expression. Legal pad open. Pen already uncapped. The 3rd chair was empty. "Thank you for coming," Megan said. I sat, placed my laptop on the table, didn't open it. "We want to start by acknowledging that what happened this morning was inappropriate," she said, "and we take responsibility for that." That was more than I expected. Not because they were good people, because companies rarely admit fault before they have to. "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. The lawyer spoke next. "We are conducting an internal review regarding the disclosure of confidential settlement information. We want to understand exactly what was said by whom and in what context." "I can help with that," I said. "The meeting was recorded." Megan nodded. "Yes, we have the audio." "Of course they did. What we need from you," the lawyer continued, "is confirmation that you did not authorize any disclosure of your agreement." "I did not," I said. "And you did not discuss the amount with any colleagues?" "No. And prior to today, had Derek ever indicated he was aware of the specific settlement terms?" "No. He only knew I was leaving." The lawyer scribbled something down. Megan folded her hands. "To be clear, Derek should not have had access to that document. We are investigating how it was obtained." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit. "May I ask a question?" I said finally. "Of course," Megan replied. "Is this being treated as a policy violation?" I asked, "or a legal breach?" The lawyer and Megan exchanged a glance. At this stage, the lawyer said carefully both. That was the answer I wanted. "Then I'll be direct," I said. "I don't intend to pursue further action unless necessary, but I will not minimize what happened. Reading that amount out loud was not an accident. It was an attempt to humiliate me." Megan nodded slowly. "We understand." "And," I added, "I want to be clear that any retaliation, overt or subtle, will be documented." The lawyer looked up. "That's reasonable." We talked for another 20 minutes. About timelines, about next steps, about my remaining 2 weeks with the company. They assured me Derek would not be interacting with me directly. When the meeting ended, Megan walked me out. "I'm sorry," she said quietly away from the lawyer. "This shouldn't have happened." "I know," I said, "but now it has." Her mouth tightened. "For what it's worth, you handled it professionally." I smiled politely. Professionalism, I had learned, is often just restraint in the presence of nonsense. By the time I returned to my desk, Derek's chair was empty. He didn't come back that day. That absence spoke louder than any apology. The rumors started immediately. Someone said Derek had been pulled into a call with legal and the VP. Someone else said he'd been escorted out. Another person swore they saw him pacing in the parking lot. Phone pressed to his ear, face red. None of it mattered yet. What mattered was the shift. People who had ignored me for years suddenly wanted to talk. Managers who had benefited from Derek's behavior were suddenly concerned. Coworkers who had stayed silent during meetings now lingered by my desk, pretending to refill water bottles. That afternoon, someone I barely knew leaned over and whispered, "I didn't know you were leaving. Congratulations." I thanked her. I didn't correct her, because technically she was wrong. I wasn't just leaving. I was being removed from a system that was about to turn on itself. At 4:47 p.m., I got another email. From Derek. Subject line, "Let's reset." I didn't open it right away. I packed my bag, shut down my computer, said a quiet goodbye to the security guard who always nodded when I walked in. I opened the email in the elevator. It read, "This morning got out of hand. Things were said that didn't need to be said. I think we both know how these misunderstandings happen. I'd like to clear the air." I laughed, out loud. The elevator was empty. Clear the air. Reset. Misunderstanding. These words are always chosen for a reason. They're vague enough to avoid admitting fault, soft enough to imply mutual blame. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Megan and outside counsel with one sentence. "Please advise on appropriate response, if any." That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I felt victorious, because I felt finished. The next morning, Derek was still absent. By noon, his calendar had been wiped. By 3 p.m., an all-hands meeting was scheduled for the following day. No agenda listed. That's when the messages started changing tone. People weren't asking if I was okay anymore. They were asking what I knew. I answered none of them. Because here's something I've learned the hard way. When a system starts cracking, it doesn't collapse all at once. It reveals pressure points, and people rush to protect themselves. Derek had built his authority on silence, on people not wanting to rock the boat, on the assumption that embarrassment keeps people small. What he didn't account for was how many people had been waiting for proof that speaking up was survivable. And now they had it. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next day. Mandatory attendance, even for people on PTO. That alone told me everything. Because companies don't gather everyone unless they're about to explain something they can't hide. I arrived early, took a seat near the back, observed. Derek wasn't there. The VP of operations was. So was someone from legal I'd never seen before. The meeting began with rehearsed calm. Then came the announcement. Derek was no longer with the company. No details, no names, just a statement about values and expectations. I watched faces around the room. Shock, relief, suspicion, satisfaction, and then something else. Recognition. People were connecting dots, replaying moments, remembering things they'd dismissed as isolated incidents. When the meeting ended, no one rushed out. They stayed, whispered, compared notes. I stood up and walked out quietly. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Megan. "We need to speak again. Today, if possible." I sat behind the wheel, engine off, phone in my hand. Because now the story was shifting. Derek had fallen faster than anyone expected. And when that happens, it's never just about one person. I didn't drive away right away. I sat there in the parking lot longer than I should have, watching people leave the building in small clusters. Some were talking too fast. Some weren't talking at all. A few glanced around like they were checking who might be watching them now. That's the moment when a workplace changes. Not when someone is fired, But when people realized the rules they thought were fixed were actually just tolerated habits, I replied to Megan with a simple, "I'm available." She asked me to come back upstairs. When I walked back into the building, the energy had shifted again. It was heavier now. Less curiosity. More calculation. People weren't speculating anymore. They were revisiting old conversations in their heads. The conference room was the same one as the day before. Megan was there along with the same outside counsel. This time, there was also someone new. A woman in her early 50s. Sharp posture. Executive presence without trying. "This is Linda," Megan said. "She's overseeing the internal review." Linda nodded at me. "Thank you for coming back." I sat down. "We won't take much of your time," Linda said. "But given what's happened, we need to ask you some direct questions." "I expected that," I said. Linda didn't smile. "Good." She leaned forward slightly. "Has Derek ever discouraged you from documenting your work?" "Yes," I said. "Has he ever asked you to exclude certain data from reports?" "Yes." "Has he ever taken credit for your work in a way that materially affected compensation or promotion decisions?" "Yes." She didn't react. She just nodded and moved on. "Did he ever suggest that raising concerns would hurt your reputation?" I paused for a moment. Not because I was unsure, because I was deciding how precise to be. He told me I needed to be careful not to make myself difficult. I said, "That leadership values team players." Linda wrote something down. "Did you feel pressured to stay silent?" "Yes." Megan shifted slightly in her seat. Linda closed her notebook. "You're not the only one who's said these things." There it was. Not a confession. Not a dramatic reveal. Just a quiet confirmation that Derek's behavior wasn't isolated. It had a pattern. Patterns are what destroy plausible deniability. "We're conducting interviews across departments," Linda continued, "including people who left the company within the last 18 months. That explained the all-hands meeting. That explained the urgency. What role do you need me to play?" I asked. Linda studied me. "At this point, we're asking for cooperation. Documentation. Context. Not testimony." "Yet," I said. She didn't disagree. I opened my laptop for the first time. "I've kept records," I said. Emails. Performance reviews. Project files with track changes. I didn't anticipate this specific outcome, but I document my work as a rule. Megan exhaled softly, like she'd been holding her breath. Linda nodded once. "That will be helpful." We spent the next hour going through timelines. I answered questions, factually. No exaggeration. No emotional language. Just events, dates, words as spoken. When the meeting ended, Linda stood up. "You handled yourself well," she said. "Yesterday and today." "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated, then added, "Derek believed you wouldn't push back." "I know," I said. "And he believed the company would protect him," she continued. I met her gaze. "That belief is expensive." She smiled faintly. "It can be." By the time I left the room, it was clear that Derek wasn't just gone. He was being dismantled. The next few days were strange. I still came into work, still sat at my desk, still wrapped up loose ends on projects I'd been managing for years. But it felt like I was already gone. People spoke to me differently, carefully, respectfully, like they were recalibrating. One afternoon, a junior analyst stopped by my desk. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For not backing down," she said. "I didn't think anyone could." I nodded. That was all. Another day, a manager who had previously ignored my emails asked if I'd be willing to share insights before I left. I declined politely, because here's the truth most people miss. Once a system shows you who it is, you don't fix it by educating it. You leave it better documented than you found it. On my second to last day, Megan asked if I had time for one final conversation. This one was informal. Her office door closed. No lawyers. No notebooks. They're considering additional settlements, she said, with others. I didn't react. And Derek has retained counsel, she added. That was inevitable. He's claiming he was unfairly targeted, Megan said, that the company used him as a scapegoat. I almost laughed. Almost. Is that what you believe? I asked. Megan shook her head. No, but it's what he's telling himself. She hesitated. He's also claiming you manipulated the situation. There it was, that I orchestrated his downfall. Yes. I leaned back. That would require me to control his behavior. Megan smiled thinly. Exactly. The irony was thick. Derek had always framed himself as the smartest person in the room, the strategist, the one pulling strings. And now, faced with consequences, he needed to believe someone else was the mastermind. It couldn't be that his own actions caught up with him. On my final day, I packed my things slowly. 7 years fits into a single cardboard box when you remove the illusions. A notebook, a mug, a framed certificate no one ever commented on. As I walked toward the exit, I passed Derek's old office. The door was open, empty, no nameplate, no personal items, just a desk that had already been claimed by someone else's future. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. Because this story isn't about revenge the way people imagine it. There was no shouting match, no public apology, no dramatic walkout. It was about letting someone reveal themselves when they thought they were winning. A week after I left, my payout hit my account. $121,000. But that wasn't the real cost. 2 weeks later, I heard through a former coworker that Derek's reputation had followed him. Quietly, recruiters stopped returning his calls. References became limited. 3 months later, I learned the company had quietly restructured multiple teams. New reporting lines, new oversight, new policies that suddenly mirrored concerns I'd raised years earlier. They called it progress. I called it overdue. I started my new job the following Monday. Different industry, smaller company. No slogans about family, just clear expectations and written accountability. On my first day, my new manager said something that stuck with me. If something doesn't make sense, I want you to say it out loud. I smiled. I will. Sometimes I think back to that conference room, to the moment Derek thought he had the upper hand, to the sound of his voice reading out that number like it was a punchline. He thought he was exposing me. What he actually did was expose himself. And that's the thing about workplaces like that. They don't collapse because someone speaks up. They collapse because someone speaks up when the system is already listening. About 6 weeks into my new role, I got a message on LinkedIn. From Derek. No greeting. No context. Just a connection request with a note attached. We need to talk. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I was scared, because I was irritated. There's a difference. I didn't respond. An hour later, another message came through. This time longer. He said he wanted to clear the record. He said he felt misrepresented. He said his career had been unfairly damaged. Still no apology. Still no acknowledgement of what he did. Just damage control. I closed the app. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. It was him. He sounded different, quieter, the confidence stripped down to something rawer and far less appealing. He said my name like we were old friends. He said he wasn't blaming me. Then he blamed me. He said HR overreacted. He said legal panicked. He said I could help fix this if I wanted to. That part made me laugh. Fix this. As if his career collapse was a spreadsheet error I could correct. I deleted the voicemail. That night, I forwarded the messages to my personal email and saved them. Habit. Documentation never leaves you once it's saved you. A week later, I heard from Megan again. She didn't call. She emailed. Subject line, checking in. Short message. Polite. Careful. She said the internal review had expanded. She said Derek's attorney was disputing findings. She said my name had come up again. Not accusatory. Informational. She asked if I was willing to answer a few follow-up questions. I agreed. The call was scheduled for the next afternoon. This time, there were more people on the line. Another lawyer. Someone from compliance. Linda again. They didn't waste time. Derek is claiming that you manipulated him into disclosing the settlement amount, one of the lawyers said. I waited. He's alleging that you baited him during the meeting, Linda added, knowing HR was listening. I nodded slowly. Is that his official position? Yes, the lawyer said. Then I'd like that claim documented, I replied, because it's demonstrably false. How so? He asked. Because I didn't know HR was listening until after he began speaking, I said. And even if I had known, that doesn't force him to violate a confidentiality agreement. Silence. And, I added, the meeting recording will confirm the sequence. Linda cleared her throat. It does. The lawyer sighed softly. He's also claiming you shared the amount with colleagues prior to the meeting. I shook my head. I didn't. We didn't find evidence that you did, Linda said, but we needed to ask. I understand, I replied. There was a pause. Then Megan spoke. We wanted to let you know, she said, that the company is preparing for potential litigation. From him? I asked. Yes. And my role? At this point, the lawyer said, you're a witness, not a defendant. That distinction mattered. Then I'll cooperate fully, I said. And I meant it, because here's something Derek still didn't understand. I never needed to ruin him. All I had to do was tell the truth and let him keep talking. Over the next month, pieces of the story filtered back to me through old coworkers. Derek hadn't just violated my agreement. He'd accessed other confidential files he wasn't authorized to view, performance notes, exit interviews, internal complaints. He'd been using them to preemptively discredit people before reviews. Once the audit started, it unraveled fast. People who'd been quiet for years suddenly had receipts, saved emails, screenshots, notes from meetings they'd written off as uncomfortable but insignificant. Turns out they weren't insignificant. They were patterns, and patterns are lethal in investigations. Derek's attorney tried to frame him as a high performer with rough edges, someone who pushed too hard, someone misunderstood. But there were too many stories, too many dates, too many corroborations. One afternoon, I got a text from the junior analyst who'd thanked me weeks earlier. They asked me to give a statement, she wrote. I did. I replied with a simple, good. Another former coworker messaged me on Signal. I thought it was just me, she said. I thought I was weak. You weren't, I typed. You were isolated. That's how these things survive, by making everyone think they're alone. 3 months after my last day, Derek's name disappeared from industry job boards. No announcements, no updates, just absence. Then came the final call. Linda asked if I could join one more meeting. This should be the last one, she said. It was. They told me Derek had filed a formal complaint alleging wrongful termination. They told me the company was confident in its position. They told me my documentation had been instrumental. Then Linda said something I didn't expect. We should have listened to you sooner. I didn't say anything. Not because I was gracious, because there was nothing useful to say. Companies don't regret silence until it becomes expensive. When the call ended, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Laptop closed. Phone face down. I thought about how close I'd come to quitting quietly years earlier. About the nights I'd convinced myself to be patient. About the times I'd wondered if I was imagining things. I thought about how easy it would have been for Derek to just not do what he did, not read the number, not make it personal, not assume power meant immunity. But people like him always escalate, because subtlety doesn't satisfy them. They need the audience. And audiences are unpredictable. A few weeks later, I ran into an old coworker at a coffee shop. She hugged me. "You know he tells people you destroyed his life," she said. I smiled. "I know." "And?" she asked. "And that's easier than admitting he did it himself." She laughed. "You don't feel bad?" I shook my head. "No, I feel accurate." Accuracy is underrated. It doesn't scream. It doesn't threaten. It waits. The last I heard, Derek took a job in a different industry. Lower title, less visibility, no direct reports. Maybe he learned something. Maybe he didn't. Either way, my life moved on. But I still think about that meeting sometimes. About how silence can feel like safety until it becomes a cage. About how numbers aren't embarrassing when they're earned. About how power looks loud right up until it's audited. And I wonder how many people are sitting in rooms right now, listening to someone speak out of turn, waiting for permission to push back. Here's the thing. Permission doesn't come first. Consequences do. And sometimes all it takes is one moment where the wrong person talks too much in front of the right listener. The part people don't expect comes after everything is supposedly over. No meetings, no calls, no legal language. Just the quiet space where your brain finally has time to replay things it postponed feeling. For me, that happened about 4 months later. I was settled into my new role by then. Different pace, smaller team, no performative leadership speeches. People said what they meant, or at least tried to. It felt unfamiliar in a way that made me realize how long I'd been bracing myself without noticing. One afternoon, my new manager forwarded me an email. "Do you know this person?" she asked. The sender's name made my stomach sink slightly, not because I was scared, but because I was tired. It was Derek's attorney. They were requesting a statement, not for the company this time. For Derek. He was pursuing arbitration, arguing that the company had acted in bad faith, that internal politics had influenced the investigation, and that certain employees, me included, had personal motivations. I stared at the email longer than necessary. This is where people think revenge stories turn dramatic again. They don't. They turn bureaucratic. I told my manager the truth, that I was involved as a witness in a prior internal review, that the matter had been documented, that I was comfortable cooperating as needed. She nodded. "Take whatever time you need." That's another thing people underestimate. Healthy workplaces don't panic when the past knocks. They ask how to support you through it. I replied to the attorney with one sentence. "Please direct all requests through the company's legal counsel." That was it. 2 days later, Megan called me. Her voice sounded different this time. Not cautious. Resolved. "We anticipated this," she said. "He's trying to discredit witnesses." "Is it working?" I asked. "No," she said. "It's making things worse." Apparently, Derek had overplayed his hand again. In his filings, he'd named multiple employees and accused them of collusion. People who barely knew each other. People whose timelines didn't even overlap. It was desperation disguised as strategy. Linda joined the call midway through. "He's arguing that your payout created resentment," she said, "and that you influenced others by talking about it." "I never talked about it," I replied. "We know," Linda said, "and we can prove it. Here's what Derek hadn't accounted for. Every access log, every email metadata trail, every timestamp. When you work in a system long enough, you forget how traceable you are. The investigation uncovered something new. Derek had accessed my settlement file before the meeting. Not accidentally. Not through HR. Through a shared drive he wasn't authorized to use. He'd searched my name, clicked the document, opened it, and then printed it. That detail mattered, because it meant the disclosure wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Megan paused when she told me that part. "He went into that meeting intending to humiliate you," she said. I didn't react outwardly. Internally, I just felt tired. Not shocked. Not angry. Just tired. The arbitration hearing was scheduled for later that year. I wasn't required to attend in person, but I submitted a sworn statement. It was long, boring, meticulous, the kind of document that doesn't go viral or make headlines, but it told the truth. Dates, quotes, attachments. The lawyer reviewing it thanked me. "This is very clean," he said. "Clean. That's what accountability looks like when you remove theatrics." Months passed. I stopped thinking about Derek most days. Then one morning I got an email with a subject line that felt strangely anticlimactic. Arbitration outcome. Derek lost. Not partially. Not ambiguously. Completely. The ruling cited misconduct, breach of confidentiality, abuse of access, and retaliation. His claims were dismissed. The company didn't countersue. They didn't need to. He was ordered to cover a portion of legal costs. When Megan called to tell me, her voice sounded lighter than I'd ever heard it. "It's officially closed," she said. I thanked her. We hung up. And that was it. No celebration. No victory lap. Just closure. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I got an email from someone I didn't recognize. Different company. Different industry. She said she'd heard about what happened through a mutual connection. She said she was dealing with something similar. She asked how I knew when to stop being patient. I didn't respond right away, because that question deserves honesty, not inspiration. I replied later that night. I didn't stop being patient when I got angry, I wrote. I stopped when I realized patience was the expectation placed on me, so other people wouldn't have to change. She wrote back almost immediately. That's exactly where I am. That's when it hit me. This story wasn't really about Derek. He was just the loudest symptom. It was about how often people are taught to absorb dysfunction quietly, to be professional, to not take things personally, to wait their turn, and how rarely they're told that documenting reality is an aggression. It's self-respect. I don't think of myself as brave. I think of myself as prepared. And there's a difference. Bravery implies risk without certainty. Preparation is risk with receipts. Sometimes people ask if I do anything differently. I think about that. I think about the nights I almost convinced myself I was overreacting, about the times I let things slide because it felt easier. But then I remember the meeting, the number, the speaker on the table, and I know the answer. No. Because if I'd stayed quiet, Derek would still be there, and someone else would be sitting in my old chair, wondering why the rules never seemed to protect them. The story wasn't loud revenge. It was slow exposure, and that kind lasts. The strangest part wasn't what Derek lost. It was what he never got back. After the arbitration ended, his name didn't just fade from my life. It became a quiet warning that traveled ahead of him. I didn't hear this directly from him. I heard it from people who had nothing to gain by exaggerating. A recruiter I'd worked with years earlier reached out casually one evening. "Random question," she said. "Did you ever work with a Derek H?" I told her yes. She paused before replying. "Good to know." That was it. No follow-up. No gossip. Just confirmation. That's how reputations actually die. Not with explosions. With hesitation. Around that time, something else started happening. People from my former company kept reaching out. Not all at once. One by one. Quiet messages. Polite emails. LinkedIn notes written and rewritten before being sent. They weren't asking about Derek anymore. They were asking about leaving. "How did you know when it was time? Did you line something up first? Were you scared?" I answered honestly. I told them I stayed longer than I should have. I told them fear doesn't disappear, it just becomes less persuasive. I told them money matters, but dignity compounds faster. One woman admitted she'd been documenting her manager for 2 years and still felt guilty about it. I told her guilt is what systems use to protect themselves. Another said she worried she'd be labeled difficult. I told her difficult is often code for unmanageable by people who rely on compliance. What surprised me most was how many men reached out too. Quiet ones, non-confrontational ones, the kind Derek never saw as threats because they didn't perform confidence loudly. One of them said something that stuck with me. He always needed an audience, he wrote. I think that's why he hated you. You didn't give him one. I hadn't thought about it that way before, but he was right. Derek thrived on reaction, on visible discomfort, on watching people calculate whether speaking up was worth the cost. What unsettled him about me wasn't that I challenged him. It was that I didn't perform fear when he tried to embarrass me. That realization followed me longer than the legal aftermath ever did. At my new job, I started noticing things I'd normalized before. Meetings where people actually finished their sentences. Disagreements that didn't turn personal. Feedback that didn't come wrapped in threats. It felt almost suspicious at first. I kept waiting for the catch. There wasn't one. That's when I realized how distorted my sense of normal had become. A year after I left, I was invited to speak on a small panel about risk management and compliance. Nothing dramatic. No mention of my past company. Just a professional setting with people who ask smart questions. Afterward, a woman approached me. She said she recognized my name. You're the one, she said. I asked her what she meant. You're the analyst who documented everything, she said. The one who didn't back down. I corrected her gently. I didn't back down because I didn't need to. She smiled. That's even better. That moment mattered more to me than the payout ever did, because it reminded me of something important. You don't always know who's watching you survive something quietly. Not long after that, I heard one last update about Derek. He'd taken a role at a much smaller company. No management responsibilities. Contract-based. Short-term. Someone told me he was careful now. Quieter. More restrained. I hope that's true. Not because I wish him well, but because people like him are most dangerous when they think nothing touched them. I don't think about him much anymore. But I do think about the version of myself who walked into that meeting expecting nothing more than a dull Monday. She didn't know she was about to be tested in public. She didn't know her preparation would be mistaken for provocation. She didn't know how many people were silently hoping she'd say something. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her to be brave. I'd tell her this. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they're louder. You don't owe loyalty to systems that only function when you're quiet. And you don't need to perform pain for your truth to be valid. The chaos wasn't the problem. The chaos was the exposure. And exposure always feels violent to people who rely on darkness. There's one part of the story I haven't shared yet. Not because it's dramatic, because it's uncomfortable, and it changed the way I see power permanently. The last thing that happened wasn't loud. There was no email, no call, no legal document. It came quietly, almost a year after everything was supposedly finished. I was cleaning out an old personal folder on my laptop one Sunday afternoon. Old resumes, archived PDFs, things I hadn't opened in years. That's when I saw a file I didn't recognize. The name was familiar, though. It was Derek's. Not his settlement. Not the arbitration. A performance review draft. Dated 3 years before the meeting. I opened it out of curiosity. It was a document I'd never been meant to see. The review was written by his manager. Detailed. Blunt. Uncomfortable. It described patterns of behavior that felt eerily familiar. Struggles with respecting confidentiality. Demonstrates a tendency to humiliate subordinates under the guise of accountability. Receives feedback defensively and redirects blame. High visibility, low self-awareness. I sat there for a long time after reading it, because that document explained everything. The company hadn't been blind. They'd known. They'd documented him the same way I'd documented my work. And then they'd promoted him anyway. That's the part people don't like to talk about. Derek wasn't a failure of character alone. He was a tolerated risk. Someone leadership decided was worth managing instead of confronting, until he became too expensive. That realization changed how I framed the entire story. It wasn't just about one man abusing power. It was about how often organizations recognize patterns and choose convenience over correction, and how the cost of that decision is always paid by someone lower on the ladder. In this case, it just happened to be me first, but not last. I closed the document and deleted it, not out of fear, out of closure, because I didn't need proof anymore. The truth had already done its work. A few months later, I ran into Linda again at a professional event. We talked briefly, small talk, industry things. Before we parted, she said something that stuck with me. "You know," she said, "your case changed how we handle a lot of things now." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "We don't wait as long," she said, "and we don't protect as hard." I nodded. "That's good." She hesitated. "It shouldn't have taken what it did." "No," I said, "but it usually does." That's the quiet truth underneath stories like this. Change doesn't come from value statements. It comes from consequences that can't be ignored. When I think back to the moment Derek read that number out loud, I don't replay it with anger anymore. I replay it with clarity. That was the moment he mistook exposure for power. He thought reading my payout would shrink me. Instead, it forced the system to look at itself. And systems hate mirrors. I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I was clever. I didn't even win because I was right. I won because I was prepared in a room where someone else assumed rules were optional. That's the kind of justice people rarely talk about. Not revenge. Alignment between truth and timing. And if you're listening to this wondering what you'd do in that situation, here's my honest answer. I don't know what you should do, but I know this. If someone ever reads your worth out loud, like it's a joke, if they try to embarrass you into shrinking, if they rely on your silence to protect themselves, they've already underestimated you, and that's when the balance starts to shift. So I'll leave you with this. Do you think Derek believed his own power until the very end? Do you think the company would have acted if he hadn't crossed that line so publicly? And if you were sitting in that room, hearing a number read out loud that wasn't meant for you, would you have spoken? I'd love to know what you think. If this story hooked you, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story from behind closed doors. Because stories like this don't end when the meeting does. They end when people decide what kind of silence they're willing to live with.